Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Climate and the People. We are so thrilled to be at the Skoll World Forum. My name is Majed. I am a very pregnant woman sitting in Boulder, Colorado. I do not think my contractions have started, so I should not be going into labor throughout this session. I am also the head of the Climate Story Unit at Dot Society, which is an organization that has been supporting independent storytellers around the globe for over 15 years. I am thrilled to have three amazing thought leaders join our conversation today. They have been so influential in shaping a lot of the work that I've done. First off, we have Dr. Susie Wong, who is an Australian who happens to be based in the Netherlands and is a social science researcher with climate outreach. We have Reverend Kyle Myers-Scott, who is an American organizer with the Evangelical Environmental Network, working with an incredibly passionate community that many assume are outside of the climate movement. And we have Majed, who gets special shout out MVP today. We had another speaker who had a family emergency who stepped out, and we called Majed 20 minutes ago, and he said, yeah, sign me up. And he drove home, and now he's here. He is a Somali British activist and politician who has served as the youngest mayor of Sheffield and a Green member of the European Parliament. He has also just launched the Union of Justice to unite people of color working on climate issues across Europe. So we are really excited to focus today's conversation talking about how do we take the partisanship out of climate change in order to widen public engagement and create more equitable solutions. We really want today to be a juicy conversation. So to help kind of prime us, each of our speakers are going to share a little bit about their work to help prime the conversation. And then we really want to open it up to an interactive group discussion. So please, please, please do not be shy about the chat. Add in your comments, your questions, your reactions, anything else you want to add. We'll be watching it closely and also integrating a lot of your feedback into our discussion too. But before we get to the shares, I kind of want to warm up the group a little bit. So I have a quick fire starter question for Kyle, Susie, and Majed. Before I give you guys the question, I do want to preface that I'm only looking for 30-second answers. So right now, it's just like your rapid, immediate response. All right, so the question is, what is an example of a climate narrative that has not been helpful to your work? A way that either the mainstream media or the climate movement has been communicating that if you had a magic wand and make it so that it never happened, what would that be? Let me know who wants to go first.
I would say the narrative that communities of color don't care about climate-related issues, which is really, really further from true, and it's not true, basically. I guess some of the language that's packaged around it may not necessarily be relatable, but they are as equally, if not actually more concerned and want to do more than other kind of groups. But it's just kind of floated around that, oh, you know, communities, because they don't care. They've got other issues to kind of focus on, which is something, if I had a magic wand, I'd completely eradicate, especially within climate, environmental organizations, and I guess wider narratives as well.
Amazing.
Majed, my answer is so similar, and it's that evangelicals are all the same and that none of us care about climate change. I get that white evangelicals in the US are some of the most skeptical of the science and the most reticent around proposed solutions. That's a reality, but the reality is also that millions of us around the country are standing up and taking action. And just like Majed said, some of the language we use might not be familiar or might not be the same. Some of our motivations might be different. Some of our proposed solutions might be different. But that doesn't mean we aren't engaged, and it doesn't mean we aren't trying to make common cause to address climate change.
I'll go last. Yeah, I completely agree with both of you. Mine is going to be a little bit different, though. I sort of outsourced mine to my colleagues a bit, and I was thinking, well, things like 12 years until the world ends, or this is our only chance. These messages. I mean, it's important to convey urgency and get people sort of activated and engaged. But often messages like this can scare people, can make people feel a lot of despair and negative emotions, which is not all that helpful. And it's so realistically, there's sort of no precise deadline, you know, to address climate change. Everything that we can do from this point onwards is important. And there are, other ways of communicating urgency, I think, especially to different audiences.
Yeah, amazing. All right, this group is definitely ready to get into it. So at Doc Society, we believe so fervently in the role that cultural strategy plays in terms of leading us towards social progress. And just in case you're not familiar with the term, cultural strategy, as defined by Liz Mann and her colleagues at the Cultural Group, is a field of practice that centers artists, storytellers, media makers, and cultural influencers as agents of social change. Cultural strategy is how we can rewrite all those like strongly, fiercely held narratives that we have in our mind. It has the ability to shape beliefs and opinions. It's how we can build political will for legislative outcomes. Culture is also the dimension where the relative importance of climate change in comparison to all other priorities has to be fought and won. But I have to admit, coming from a community of creatives, I think we've really struggled to keep climate change at the forefront. And we have definitely failed to actually reach those communities who truly need to be activated. Acclaimed author Mitav Ghosh so beautifully captured this when he wrote, "When future generations look back, they will certainly blame the leaders and politicians of this time for their failure to address the climate crisis. But they might as well also hold artists and writers to be equally culpable, for the imagining of possibilities is not, after all, the job of bureaucrats." Storytellers play this incredible role of shaping how we as a society understand the biggest crises of our time and their solutions. Storytelling is how we create shared meaning. But when you look at some of the past most popular climate stories of over the past decade, you'll start to realize how monotonous they are. A lot of them fall into the same tropes. Many of them rely on the same trusted messengers, which is, quite frankly, usually white men from the global north. And what we're doing is we end up serving the same population over and over again while we're alienating the rest. This is a battle, the cultural battle, that we are not winning. And we have to realize as a creative community that we can't do it alone anymore. And so it's why at Doc Society, we launched the Climate Story Unit, which is a narrative shift initiative to support transformative storytelling to help advance a more climate just and biodiverse future. Across all of our programs, we work closely with storytellers, and we bring in really amazing impact strategists and movement leaders, climate scientists, and policy advocates to really critically ask ourselves, who are the audiences and the communities that we need to be engaging? What are the narratives that we need to be elevating? And how do we make sure that these messages are actually delivered? So for today's discussion, we really want to challenge ourselves to rethink how can the creative community work with thought leaders in adjacent communities, from social science researchers to policy advocates to faith organizations, to really think about how can we shape a cultural strategy that truly leads us to more equitable and just climate solutions. So to kick off our conversation, first going to go over to Susie, whose work at Climate Outreach truly has been so transformational about helping reshape how we at Doc Society think about our work in terms of community engagement. And Susie, as I let you take the mic, and I know you have a bit of slides to share, the rest of us will just go on mute too.
Thank you, Megha. Thanks for the introduction. I hope everyone can see my screen. I think it's working. All right, great. Yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I think I'll start us off by introducing a little bit about Climate Outreach. So Climate Outreach is a charitable organization focused on building a global public mandate for climate action. We believe that people are at the center of addressing climate change, and in our work, as Megan mentioned, we use social science research, and we work with advocates, with governments, with businesses to ensure that climate engagement is as effective and as impactful as it can possibly be. And one of the key aims of our work is to bring about cross-societal support for climate action, to make sure that people from all corners of society are on board, which is essentially important to building political will, among other things. And we do so using a values-based approach. And that's because we know by now that public engagement isn't just about scaring people into caring or about giving them more information or more science. Both of these approaches have a place and have a role, but what we focus on is starting with people's values. And research shows that people tend to be influenced by narratives that resonate with who they are, with the things that are important to them, especially when it's presented by people that they trust and also made acceptable in their environments, you know, the norms that they see around them. But the flip side of finding these sort of unifying values and ideas is that often there are divisions in society, especially around issues such as climate change. So political polarization around climate change is a defining part of the problem in many countries around the world. And in these cases, in these contexts, people's views about climate change can then be bound up with their political or their social identities. So they might think about climate change because they are a conservative or because they're a liberal in a certain way, for instance. And one of the key things that we work on is overcoming political polarization by trying to understand how to reach audiences that are not already convinced about climate change. And in the UK over the last 15 years, Climate Outreach, and among others, have worked on this sort of overcoming polarization. And we've seen sort of significant movement and change from a society that used to be quite split on climate change along political lines to now a conservative government last year announcing a transition away from petrol and diesel cars, which is, yeah, quite unimaginable. And some of our recent work you can see in this figure here, the 7 British segments, is a project called Britain Talks Climate that we co-developed with our partners More in Common and the European Climate Foundation. And this uses what's called a segmentation model to group the British population into well, we found 7 groups based on their core values. And we found that these groups have very distinct priorities and views about how society should be, not only for climate change, but also other issues such as democracy or COVID-19 or inequality. And this gives us a sort of a more nuanced way of looking at society, not just along sort of left and right dimensions, but also we can look at them in terms of how engaged they are with society and with politics. So from engagement to disengagement, we can look at it in terms of supporting the system or anti-establishment views. We can look at it in terms of whether they're more inward-looking nationally or outward-looking internationally. Well, one of the main things that we learned is that, at least in the UK, in this particular example, all 7 groups have more in common than we thought, especially around climate change. So in the UK, climate change is consistently seen as an issue for everyone, and no particular segment is defined by their skepticism of the issue. But at the same time, what we do learn from this approach is that each group has a distinct way of being environmental. I can't go through them all, but I've got a couple of examples to quickly run through, I hope. At the top here, we have a quote from someone who, in a group that we would typically consider already engaged, already concerned and active on climate change. They tend to be very progressive, tend to be sort of have received tertiary education, tend to identify globally rather than nationally. So not so much as British, but as global citizens. And climate change is the most important issue to them. This is quite a familiar audience for people who work on climate change issues. But then the next group along, the next quote, comes from someone who is in the most conservative segment that we found. They consistently vote for the Conservative Party. They're more traditional. They're also proudest of being British and of British heritage. And they also tend to be put off by a certain kind of environmentalism. But then when we look at their actions, they're about as engaged as the previous group when it comes to things like recycling, as reducing waste or buying local and seasonal foods, and also feel very passionate about protecting the natural landscape. And then just quickly, the last group that I have at the bottom is also predominantly conservative voting. They're very authoritarian. They tend to be lower earning than the middle group. And they're very worried about crime and immigration in the UK. And they also have their own form of environmentalism. They're actually the third most concerned about climate change across all of the segments. And they sort of convey, the quote here conveys a sense of frustration that many environmentally friendly actions are costly and not accessible to them. But their concern is sort of more local rather than global. These groups also behave differently and support different policies. So if we look at this figure, what this shows is that one group overwhelmingly dominates the conversation about politics on social media, and that includes climate change. And this points to the need to consider what's being said, who's saying it, and who's listening on what platforms, figuring out when we're speaking to an echo chamber and how to reach beyond that. And of course, all of this would look different in different societies, but what this approach gives us is an in-depth and relatively stable understanding of how different groups in society think about climate change and how we can begin to engage with them. And yeah, it's currently being used by the COP26 team, for instance. We're also talking to media organizations and civil society organizations, working on practical campaigns and bringing these insights to life in outreach activities. So I've tried to fit all I can into this very short intro. It's a very small part of what we do, but if anything has sort of sparked anything, feel free to reach out. Looking forward to the discussion.
Amazing. Thanks, Susie. And we'll definitely be dropping in some links for y'all's amazing work into the chat too. Next up, we have Kyle, who has years of experience of working with a highly influential, but also commonly misunderstood evangelical community in America. Kyle?
Thanks, Mega. And thank you, Susie. Wow, that was terrific. I love what Climate Outreach does, and they have been a huge resource for us in the work that we do. I think it's safe to say Climate Outreach is doing this incredibly important research into values-based messaging, and we are trying to put that research into practice in the field on the ground with a constituency that has historically been unmoved around climate change and checked out of the conversation. So the Evangelical Environmental Network has been around since 1993 with the charge of engaging evangelical Christians across the US on the issues of environmental protection and climate change. And the way we do it is exactly what Susie just laid out. We use value-based messaging. We train up trusted messengers to try to communicate to the evangelical community in the US that they don't have to change anything about who they are. Exactly who they are is who they need to be a climate activist. And the values they already hold, values like the authority of Scripture to be our guiding rule of life and faith, values like defending the sanctity of life, a vulnerable life, whether it's the unborn or young kids or the elderly, values like sharing the gospel and how climate action can be good news for exactly the kinds of people Jesus said he came to give good news to, which is the poor, which is the marginalized and the oppressed. All of these values that we already hold as evangelical Christians are consistent with taking action to address climate change. So we do that work in lots of different ways. We educate and equip evangelical Christians across the US around what our study of creation is telling us, what the science is telling us is happening. We do deep dives into Scripture to unlock what Scripture actually has to say about what God thinks of God's creation, our call to care for that creation, what God's good future is for that creation, to help root evangelical Christians in that value of the authority of Scripture to guide our actions. And we also create lots of opportunities for these equipped, educated Christians to turn that knowledge into action politically with their lawmakers. We believe that changing hearts and minds is really, really important. It's faithful to the gospel, but it's also part of the ladder of engagement that's trying to bring more and more evangelical Christians into the political conversation around climate solutions. In 2016, 26% of the overall US electorate, 26% were white evangelical voters, even though white evangelicals only make up about 17% of the US population. So white evangelical voters have always outperformed at the ballot box, and that's made them a disproportionately powerful piece of the electorate. In 2020, the exit polls are a little tough because of all the mail-in balloting, but it's estimated that that number held pretty steady at about 24%. And a lot of Republican members of Congress were sent to Washington with strong evangelical support. So this is a really strategic and important constituency that can have a disproportionate impact on the federal conversation around climate change if more of them can raise their voice and speak out of a place of their values, speak to all of their lawmakers, including conservative lawmakers, and say, look, we want you to take this seriously. We think this is consistent with who we are. Even if we identify as conservatives, we think this is what it means to be a conservative. Those are the narratives that we are trying to change and the voices that we're trying to raise up. Love to talk more about how we do that and about the strategy we have for messaging and the trusted messengers we're raising up, but I'll save that for the question time.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Kyle. And just as a reminder to everyone who's listening in, please don't be shy about adding in questions into the chat. We definitely want to start going to those quite soon. So next up, we have Majed. Majed, he came to the UK at 5 years old as a refugee from Somalia. As a community organizer, he was elected mayor of Sheffield at the age of 29, and then elected as a Green member of the European Parliament. So you've been both an activist and an elected politician. Majed, you know, it's easy for someone who's outside the movement to assume that, you know, people who are associated with the Green Party in the UK, which has usually been seen as a party of white people from privilege, Sheffield is a northern town with an industrial past, and you're an immigrant. What made you join them? What have you done to try to open the doors to have more diverse membership, more of the groups that Susie was kind of alluding to?
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a real joy and honor to be joining such an amazing, wonderful host and panel. So thank you for the invitation. And in regards to your question, Mega, yeah, I joined the Green Party, I'll be honest with you, not for its environmental credentials or policies or anything to do with climate. It was more so their social policies. So for me, it was the fact that they wanted to eradicate tuition fees. Having a free education was really, really important to me, but also they always had a red line against austerity. So a lot of their kind of social policies was something that really drew me to them, despite, I guess, all my family and friends being of the Labour Party kind of thing. So for me, it was, and of course, once I joined the Green Party, it was also kind of realizing that we've only got one planet and we need to live within our means kind of thing. But for me, it's really, really, representation is really, really important. So I always kind of like have this saying where I'm like, God gave us two hands, one to climb up with and the other one to lift people up as we're climbing, basically. So for me, even as someone who was able to kind of get elected as a councilman versus a councillor, and then as I would make, it was like, what can I do to kind of open up that space so other people can kind of enter that space? Because it's never like, as some people like love kind of say, oh, it's the first black council in Sheffield. It's not something to be proud of, especially in the day and age that we're kind of living in. So it was like, okay, what can I do? So I would like support a woman called Kultum to basically to become a councillor, just doing whatever I could to basically help people and take positions up. But it's just on a kind of just on the topic of representation, basically, of course, it's important that we have people that look like us in elected roles, because whether we look at local politics or national politics, the people that we choose to elect us don't reflect the people that they're there to represent. So of course, it's important to get more people of color, to get more women, to get other kind of marginalized groups into leadership roles. But for me, it's not representation at all costs, because as Dr. Cornel West said, there's too many black and brown faces in high places, but that that doesn't necessarily mean that we will get the societal changes that we need. So for example, to give you a UK context, we've got our Home Secretary is, what do you call it, somebody who's from Indian descent. Our Chancellor of the Exchequer, 2 high-profile government roles are from people of colour. Yet, when we look at some of the policies that they're pushing, they're very draconian. I would rather have, I'll be honest, I'd rather have a white old man as a leader who's going to basically pursue social justice than somebody who's of a person of color, then who's not going to have that. So it's kind of recognizing that, because you do get a lot of political parties saying, what are you complaining about? We're diverse. We give you we've got all these people of color, we've got no issues kind of thing, which is not fair from the truth kind of thing.
No, thank you for sharing that. Your new organization of Justice, which, full disclosure, you did invite me very kindly to join your advisory board, is described as a European independent, people of color led organization dedicated to racial justice and climate justice. It feels like a bit of a challenge to be able to bring all these different people together of one nation. How are you wanting to go about uniting people of color across geographies, religions, and languages? And what gets you optimistic and energized to be able to do that?
Definitely, thank you. So yeah, as we know, the fight for climate justice is the fight of all our lives, and it's something that was created by the privileged few, but is of course hitting people of color and marginalized communities the hardest. And if we're really serious about wanting to defeat the climate crisis, it's important and vital that we must urgently place the people on the front line of its harshest effects at the heart of the conversation. And like you said, there's many challenges in what we're trying to do, but I guess when you look at Europe, all across Europe, whether that be East Europe, West Europe, whatever it is, there's so many amazing grassroots groups and organizations already doing amazing things. And one of the things we're currently doing at the moment is literally building a vibrant network across Europe, where we're going to, of course, facilitate training, just, I guess, mostly just to equip people with the skills and the knowledge that they need to basically bring about change within their own communities. And of course, we also wanted to kind of influence, but we also kind of so basically, one of the things we're doing is, of course, building this network, influencing, but also kind of campaigning. But you're right, there are some challenges that kind of come with it, for example, language. So it's everyone, there's loads of languages that kind of are spoken across Europe. So one of the things we always have to ensure that we do is, in all our events and meetings, at the very least, we've got Spanish, Italian, and French interpretation, basically. So it's, I guess, removing as much barriers away from people as much as possible. So it's also just, again, just trying to consolidate all the kind of groups across Europe doing amazing things, to speak with one voice, but also give them the kind of skills and resources. But it's also, let's not forget, Europe as a continent, or the EU as an institution, has got a role and responsibility to the rest of the world, which is something that we can't also kind of neglect as well. Of course, when you look at the global south and Europe's relation to that, whether it be former colonies, and it's still a lot of people still argue colonization still exists. They may not necessarily have troops and people on the ground. If you look at the way the financial systems are set up and everything, it still does exist. So it's what can Europe do as a continent, as the European Union, to do to basically support the global south? Because it could be fair enough, the UK, Europe, we can have the most amazing Green New Deal, absolutely amazing. But if we don't have a global approach to it, we're not going to solve the climate crisis. So it's also kind of recognizing that we have got historic and duty and responsibility to global south, but also having those difficult conversations, which a lot of people don't want to have, regarding climate reparations and all these kind of things. But it's just highlighting that Europe's got a role to play, and not kind of, as the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, said, it's up to each individual country to sort its own climate situation, which is not true, of course.
As a follow-up question to that, Majed, I'm curious, what role do you think narrative or stories can play in order to be able to help enable that type of conversation and that action that you're looking for?
Great question. So it's, of course, we've got laws in the UK and the European Union that, of course, are really, really important, legislation that is important that we need to kind of have, but it's also kind of really important to kind of highlight that you can't legislate empathy, you can't legislate compassion, and that's where storytelling really kind of comes in, and in my opinion, especially because it's such a powerful tool to use, and especially if it's sharing stories of the people who are on the front line, who are most kind of affected and by it. And especially like, I've been doing a lot of reading in terms of like popular culture as well, how to use popular culture for social change is really, really important. So I think it really kind of brings it down to earth, and it makes it a bit more real life for people, because within the climate movement, it can literally be a lot of like, oh, climate emissions, like 1.5, or a lot of kind of jargon can be kind of used. But if we really wanted to kind of really win, I guess, the hearts and minds of people and really get people on board, I think storytelling, it really genders empathy. And it's, regardless, even if it's something that really affects you directly or not, it's something that will move you to inspire to take some form of action, basically. So I think it's something that gets neglected quite a lot, because of course we like, people want to push reports, want to push facts, want to push all these other things, but it's all that is amazing. But if we're not engaging people and that's not kind of being turned to action, then it's just kind of like, it's, of course, all those things are important. It's kind of, but it's, we want to kind of, we're pushing for action. And I think storytelling and arts and culture is the kind of real vehicle to kind of propel us to doing that.
Yeah, thanks, Majed. We'll definitely be picking that thread up again. So let's open it up to a group discussion. You know, and Susie, you touched upon a bit about this in your presentation, but you know, if we were to look at news headlines or social media banter, it's really created this perception that our society is really fragmented, that the topic of climate conversation has become so politically polarized that it will be impossible for us to find common ground. But your research, which of course the research that you showed was UK focused, but it's showing you challenged a bit of that and saying that actually we can find more in common than what we actually all perceive to be the situation, than what, you know, social media would show us. Kyle and Majed, I'm really curious, you know, based off of y'all's experience of working in community, how do you think about like the role of, like, do you believe that we're as polarized as we seem to be? And what do you think are some misconceptions about the communities that you engage with that you'd like to rebuke?
Wow, I love that question. It's so important. I think it is important to acknowledge the level of polarization that does exist, especially in the U.S. Around climate change. It is very real, and it is very real in the communities that we work in. However, like you said, Mega, it is not insurmountable. And I think one of the ways we go about trying to depoliticize and kind of cool down the temperature, lower the temperature around the conversation around climate change in the communities we work in with evangelicals is stepping back from the political considerations around climate change. Even though if we're gonna achieve solutions, we have to go there eventually, right? Politics is where we decide how to allocate resources, what public decisions we make for the sake of the common good. And since climate change is a systemic problem, it's gonna require a systemic political solution. So we have to get there eventually, but we don't have to start there. I think everybody wants to start at the politics. And when we start there, then very few people are open to new information. Very few people are curious. A lot of what we try to do and the work that we do is cultivate curiosity, curiosity for what people are passionate about, what drives people in their daily lives. And then once we are able to understand that, we're able to connect those passions and those values to climate change. If a person's really passionate about providing for their family, and if they have a history of dislocated employment, and maybe even have some trauma around living at or below the poverty line, and they've clawed their way out, and all they hear about climate change is that it's going to raise their taxes or it's going to put them out of a job, there's a lot of fear there. So if you remain curious and you understand that that might be something someone's really passionate about, you can talk about family sustaining clean jobs in a clean energy economy, how the extractive economy is kind of based on this precarious nature for workers, and how we can actually change that. We can create a society where we have more and better paying jobs for more people that are more sustainable. So I think remaining curious is really important to what we do. And then connecting people's passions and values that they'll tell you about. All you have to do is listen. People will tell you what they care about. People will tell you what matters to them. And if you're patient and curious enough to hear it, then it's just being savvy enough and creative enough to connect those passions and values to climate action, to environmental protection. And so much of what we try to do is help people hear the language of climate action with words that they can understand and language that they can understand. George Marshall from Climate Outreach taught me this several years ago in Paris at COP21, that so many people hear climate communication sound like guilt, shame, and blame, telling them all the things they're doing wrong, all the things they have to change about the life that they love to be more authentic and effective on climate change. Very few people are going to be moved by that. So instead, what we try to do is communicate in a way that affirms who people are. We say, look, this is everything you love about who you are, and that's beautiful. And then we try to create a positive social norm around action. We point to other people like them and say, these are people just like you who care about the same things you do, who are taking action. And when you take action, you deepen your connection to those people. Maybe it's people in your own church or just other Christians or other evangelicals. You become more like them, and the world becomes more how you want it to be when you take this action. So it's meeting people on their own terms and communicating in a way that's inspiring and hopeful, and helps lead to a world that they want to see, not a world that these strangers want to see and are telling them they need to work toward.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. I'm curious. Majed, how about you? What's been your experience?
Yeah, so it's, black communities, just people of color communities from across the UK and Europe are sadly subjected to areas which have poor access to education, housing, healthcare, clean air quality. And for those that don't know, the first case of somebody dying of air pollution and as a cause of death within the UK from a 9-year-old black girl called Ella Kissy Deborah. And so it's a real thing that black people and communities of color are suffering the most. But at the same time, it's for a lot of people I kind of speak to, it's always like, they'll always say, but Majed, like our immediate needs always trumps kind of the long-term outcome of something else. So whether people might be living paycheck to paycheck, or it's just even like, Susie mentioned, even this whole kind of language of like, oh my God, it's a catastrophe kind of thing. So of course, like it's, as well as kind of just acknowledging it, focusing like, rather than I guess always focusing on the doom and gloom, which of course has its place for it, we should also kind of really be, I don't really kind of just paint a picture of what things could be. Like it's, because at times it's easiest to kind of fall into despair all the times. And for me, like some of the communication language that works is just, I know it's kind of overused, but literally that kind of language of hope and well, no, this is what we could do, this is what our community could look like, this is what our region, our kind of country could look like. So it's just always kind of painting that kind of positive kind of future, but also not just, as we kind of like, it's all well and good kind of having hope, but in itself, that alone can feel a bit too spectatorial sometimes. So it's, you want to kind of couple that with action more than anything else. And I just want to kind of just touch upon what Kyle said. It's earlier when he was like, people always tend to focus on politics first kind of thing. Whereas what's interesting is there's only so much influence you can do, so much lobbying and you can do to elected representatives, because it's like they can always just choose to ignore you, basically. If that's the only thing that you're doing is literally think, okay, we need to lobby, just work with elected representatives, it's not that effective. That's why it's equal to all. It's also important, of course, build basically those people on the ground to get them to organize, to work on a local level. But also you want to, and I think this is where arts and culture and storytelling and creativity comes, you also want to use that to change public perception, because politician elected representatives will listen to their constituents because they've got elections every two whatever years. So even though they might not necessarily listen to you, they'll be like, well, wait a minute, if everyone's talking about this, they're very fickle people at times. They will literally just get onto what's happening just so they can jump on what's popular. So it's, of course, influence them, but you can influence them indirectly. And also, you can argue more effectively by focusing on the constituents, trying to change public perception, trying to change and mobilize your community, all those kind of, but if you're just solely thinking you can bring about change just by having meetings and just, it's not gonna be as effective.
Yeah, thank you. You know, it's so interesting, so much the conversation today, or so far in this session, has really been about us thinking about the nuances of all the different types of communities, specific communities that we're working with, and really understanding what are their values and how do we connect with them. But I'm really curious, and this is a question for anyone in the group that wants to answer it. But as we think about mobilizing different communities towards climate action, do you think we need to go with more of a divide and conquer kind of approach with our messages, or do you think it's possible to find a common narrative that actually unites us all? Who wants to go first?
I can go if, yeah. I think, so, sorry, I know you unmuted at the same time, Majed. I think it's a really good question, and I think one thing that came to mind as Carl and Majed were just talking was that climate change is often seen as it's often portrayed to people as a particular type of issue. It's often in a political sphere or a scientific sphere, and then it's distant from the regular person. It's not related to their life. And I think part of the answer to your question, Mega, is that we need more narratives. We need unifying narratives, but then we also need to accept that there's not going to be a single message that will resonate with everyone. So it's kind of an in-between, which I know is a bit of a cop-out answer, but maybe some groups need, we need to understand that the nuances and the values of particular groups, but also try to unify where we can and form sort of coalitions of climate engagement if possible.
Yeah, I think you're right, Susie. I think we can get to where we need to be by taking different routes and through different tactics and strategies. I think the end goal cannot be watered down. I think we have to be united around an end goal of a rapid transition to a 100% global clean energy economy and climate justice for all. Like, that has to be the common goal for everyone engaged in this work. And if that's the case, I think there are lots of different ways to get there. One of the metaphors that we like to use in our work is that the work of moving the world, and the US in our case, toward that end goal is the work of erecting a massive tent. And a massive tent has a whole lot of tent legs and tent poles to hold it up. And we, in the work that we are doing, trying to reach evangelicals around this conversation, is raising one discrete tent pole in service of raising that larger tent. Sunrise Movement, the Green New Deal Coalition, other folks are doing it, raising their own tent pole and doing their own thing. But as long as we're all raising the same tent, I think we can do it in ways that are unique to our communities, messages that uniquely reach our communities. The trick is making sure that our end goal is the same. I think that is where we need to be in a lot more conversation with each other across the movement, and make sure we're not working at cross purposes together. But I don't think we need a unifying, frankly, I'm not sure one exists, a totally unifying narrative to bring everybody together around the same tactic and strategy to get to where we need to go. And I'm not sure we need that. But we do need clarity on what we're all aiming toward. And I'm not sure that conversation is happening as robustly as it needs to.
And just wanted to touch on what Kyle said. 100% agree in terms of we all need to, of course, have the same end goal at the end of the day. And the thing is, it's like climate justice in France looks very different to climate justice in Dakota, looks very different to climate justice in Quebec. So in some way, like, having different narratives is quite important, and in basically all kind of working towards that kind of our end goal. And the thing is as well, it's everyone's understanding and worldview is different, especially if we're looking at, like, if we're building a narrative, like, especially in terms of a story, well, who's the goodie and who's the villain and who's the kind of hero kind of aspect. So it's like, for some people, like, the villain can be like lack of global governance, or it can be like growth and injustices, or it can just be radical environmental. Everyone's got a different vision. Everyone's worldview and perception is different depending on who you speak to, basically. But I think they've all got a place in the climate story, basically. And I think, as Kyle said, as long as we're all kind of working towards the same goal at the end of the day, and it's all valid, basically.
Yeah. And I want to kind of tease out this concept of the common goal that we're all working towards, as we spent this past year being in lockdown and being, we're still navigating very much the pandemic. There's a lot of conversations in terms of, what is this new normal that we're building towards? And, so much of what we've seen is the power of being able to create and articulate future visions to be able to mobilize communities towards. And so I'm curious, as you're working with your communities, what is the vision of the new normal that you're mobilizing your community towards? And how are you going about to kind of build the political will to really realize this vision?
So I guess the recent global events have really massively transformed what is possible, politically possible, just possible in every aspect of it. Like the coronavirus, like the Black Lives Matter movement that kind of course, it's been happening for many years, that we saw a lot during last summer. They've all kind of really exposed not only the deep inequality within our society, but also proven what many people have been arguing for a long time, that we are only as secure as the most vulnerable amongst us, basically. So like the realms of what can be done have really dramatically expanded over these kind of events. I think as a result, we really have to be ambitious and demand more. So this kind of concept of like a new normal, because I think that like even when you hear people saying, "Oh, I want things to go back to normal," kind of thing. Normal didn't work for a lot of people. Like we don't want to go back to everything that was happening, but it really gives us, like you said, an amazing opportunity that we've got at the moment to kind of redefine the future that we're all kind of working towards. We can also argue that in some parts of the world, we've got the worst possible people running the country at the worst possible time. But that to aside, it really is an opportunity. Like so I think from, I guess, speaking to a lot of kind of grassroots communities from across Europe, people have really cottoned on to this idea and thinking, well, right, we need to kind of really mobilize and do what we can to kind of, whether that be change and the way we kind of engage with politicians, engage with our institutions, whatever it is, it seems like a real opportunity to kind of like, right, now we're looking for new models of how we're going to finance things or whatever it is. But it's a really pivotal moment to kind of really start knocking on the door and really kind of getting people galvanized, basically.
Yeah. Kyle, did I see you unmute too?
Yeah, I think Majed is right on. Like the wasn't working. We need a new normal, and this is an unprecedented moment to have that conversation. I'm starting to get a little worried that we're losing that moment. So I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I think now more than ever we have to take hold of that and fight like crazy to have that conversation. Some of the ways that we are trying to move our community around that conversation is helping link things like the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on marginalized communities in the US, how Black, Indigenous, Asian Americans, other communities of color have been disproportionately harmed by COVID-19 as a respiratory pandemic, because those communities, under normal circumstances, right, during the old normal, we're also disproportionately afflicted with things like asthma and other upper respiratory diseases as a result of proximity to fossil fuel infrastructure. So helping peel back some of those layers and saying, look, this is what normal used to look like, and that's not consistent with who we are. People who are called to love our neighbors cannot fight for a normal that sacrifices our neighbors on the altar of cheap fuel. So we need to fight for things like the infrastructure package that's moving through Congress right now, which is probably our best opportunity in a generation to secure massive clean energy investments and all kinds of other really important policies to try to create a new normal where Black and brown bodies in the US are not sacrificed so that we can have cheap fuel, but instead all people are protected. So we're messaging around the infrastructure package right now, around it as an opportunity, an unprecedented opportunity for good family-paying jobs, as well as an opportunity to transition to a future where everybody's health is valued equally and everybody is protected from pollution.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I think Kyle started to touch upon the question that Heather asked in the chat, and I'll just say it out loud again and want to see if also if Susie and Majed want to build upon, add any additional thoughts on it. But Heather Grady asked, can our panelists link their effort with the massive amount of funding that is going into the COVID crisis-related recovery and infrastructure funds? How do we activate people to care about boring legislation that could determine our very existence decades hence?
I think that's a really good question. I'll come in there and also with a little bit of my thoughts for the previous question, where I also, again, the vision for the new normal is very similar to what's already been described. I think some of the research that we've done in the past year to 6 months has shown that actually, yeah, people don't want to go back to normal. A lot of people, yeah, absolutely right. It wasn't working for them, and despite, I mean, it's been a terrible, awful crisis that's happened in the last year. One of the things that has come out of it is that in all of these places where we've had lockdowns, people have learned to value their green spaces, value the environment, and value being able to get out into nature more than ever. And that's something that we've seen in the Britain Talks Climate sort of research, but also elsewhere as well. And it's important to also note that in a lot of these countries, in the UK and in the US, and I'm sure as well, that marginalized communities don't have equal access to these spaces. And so it's been particularly rough on them. I think part of sort of building on these recent experiences is really, really powerful. And also learning that, understanding sort of how quickly things can change, from whether from a pandemic or from all of the policies that have been enacted to try and control the pandemic, that our lifestyles can change dramatically, and that we have the capacity to bring about change, not only as individuals by distancing, by staying within rules, but also by influencing the policies that are brought about.
Just on I think it was a question from Heather, you said, and the thing is, I guess with policy and legislation, it can be boring stuff, but it's important stuff that we can't afford to ignore, basically. And I think policymakers, researchers, they've got a real responsibility, because unless these researchers, policymakers are part of the community and are creating this legislation policy with the communities, it's very difficult. So I think they've got responsibility to really make sure those people who are mostly affected are involved in that process. And I think, like, a lot of kind of NGOs, policymakers, they tend to kind of either just solely focus on data, but it's also kind of worth pointing out they haven't got all the answers, like, to a lot of kind of the things that need improvement. So it's important to kind of work with those communities, and they need to look within themselves and also kind of make sure that they are not kind of neglecting and involving those people on the ground in every aspect of their policy making, basically. And just one point I kind of just wanted to kind of, because I know somebody touched upon despair earlier on, but I always it's something I always kind of really remind myself every time, is that the problems that we kind of face at the moment, that be COVID, they didn't necessarily come down from the heavens. They were like man-made problems, basically, right? So you can argue mainly by men in suits, in all honesty, but the thing is, like, all that can change, but like good human decisions can really, really change everything. And I think it's, for a lot of people who feel despair that things can't change, is kind of something I kind of always kind of fall back to.
Yeah. Thanks, Majed. So we are quickly approaching the hour. So I have one last question for y'all to kind of help wrap up the conversation. It's been an incredible discussion. I think we've touched upon a range of topics, but what is the one thing that each of you would want the audience who is listening in, whether now or on a recording later, to really take away from our conversation and share back with their own community?
I think I would want people to understand, and this is nothing original from me, but I would want people to understand that everybody, exactly who they already are, has a reason to care about climate change and to do something about it. And as activists tasked with mobilizing people toward action, it's our job, it's incumbent upon us to help people hear that. A lot of people have never been told that who they are can be a climate activist or can be someone who cares about climate change. And as an activist, I take that as a failure on my part to communicate effectively. So I hope that people would take away that everyone in your life has a reason to care. And with a little curiosity and a little active listening, we can find ways to help them unlock that.
How about you, Susie?
That was so good. That was pretty much what I had, but I do have a backup one. I completely agree with what you said, Kyle, and I also my other one would be to have sort of build the idea that citizens are agents of change, which is work that for instance in the Car Centre in the UK they've been building on this idea, not to put all of the pressure on individuals to do so, because that's absolutely not what we're saying, but that the danger of going of saying that we people don't have a say is that you lose that sense of power and agency that individuals have as voters, as citizens, as people in communities. You have power to talk to people in your community, to your friends, to your family, to people in your church and elsewhere, and also to, of course, the actions that we often see are protesting and signing petitions, but also you have power as owners of bank accounts, as people who have assets, or all of these ways that we can change our behavior, and we can be part of it. That's that's mine. Thanks.
Amazing. And Majed, to wrap us up.
Well, mine's going to be a mix of both of them. Honestly, it's for me, there's a lot of big emphasis on compassion in everything I do, and I think it's important that it's a central component in everything that we all kind of do, in all honesty. And the thing that everyone's got a role to play. Like, it's because a lot of people always think, well, I feel powerful, so they don't know what they can do. And the thing is, we've all got some degree of influence, whatever God-given talent. Like, I don't care if you're a writer, write, if you're a comedian, make some funny content, whatever it is. But even at the very least, even if we literally were to have conversations with our families about, at the very least, even as difficult as that could be, even that itself is more than enough. And that, of course, will hopefully have a ripple effect everywhere. But it's just that we can't afford to not do anything. And we're capable of more than we can do, to be honest. And I think it's just realizing that.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you so much, Majed, Susie, and Kyle. It's been so incredible to be in conversation with y'all. The chat has been so active and giving y'all shout outs throughout the conversation too. So definitely take a look at it. And thank you again to the Skoll World Forum for inviting us to have this conversation. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you all.